Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty livecast. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. I'm Richard Harris, Director of the Truth and Liberty Coalition, and I am super excited to have Karen Conrad with us in studio tonight.
Thank you, Richard.
Hey,
it's so great to be here.
Feels like old times.
It does. It kind of feels like home.
Yeah, so good to have you. And well, I am really excited about tonight's livecast because we have as our special guest Jeremy Dys from First Liberty, one of the leading organizations in America fighting for our First Amendment freedoms. And we're going to introduce Jeremy to you guys in just a second. But next, I just want to turn it over to Karen because I think she's got some awesome information she wants to share.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And welcome, everybody, to Truth and Liberty. We were just visiting on this set, and I said, if there was ever a time for Truth and Liberty, it is now.
Amen.
There is just so much going on, so it's really a privilege to be part of this broadcast.
It absolutely is.
Yes, so we are so excited tonight about the program, and I want to encourage you to check out our website at truthandliberty.net. We have so much information out there, and every time I come back, there's more information that's being added. So Richard's adding blogs, we've got articles, links, so check it out at truthandliberty.net. And we want to encourage you that if you are watching on social media, we're so glad to have you, but if you want to make sure that you get to see the whole program, nothing being censored. The best place to watch it really is at truthandliberty.net. We've got a couple resources that we've added here. The primaries are coming around, and so this is a time where voters really want to get educated on what's happening. And so we've got the iVoter Guide out there, and we've got 3 states, it looks like, that were updated: Virginia, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Also, we've got Trump's Ukraine call transcript, which I'm sure we'll visit about tonight, the redacted whistleblower complaint, so lots of good information on Truth and Liberty. Also at Andrew Wommack Ministries and Charis Bible College, there's always so much happening. And some of the events that are right ahead of us are Women's Arise, which is coming on November 7th through the 9th, and we want to welcome Sue Sheriff and Dorothy Brown as our special speakers this year. Also Esther, Queen of Persia. Boy, if you enjoy a great musical, it is better than Broadway quality because it's not so only, it is the music and the performance is beautiful, but the content is so quality. And that is coming up that same weekend of the 7th through the 9th. And to register for those events, you can go to awmi.net/events. And then right behind that, we've got the Heart of Christmas. It's just one of the family favorites.
It is such a great show, isn't it?
It is just a wonderful show. So come and check out Charis Bible College and Andrew Wommack Ministries for those events. Also, every week we have a giveaway. And the way that you are eligible to win is just to simply subscribe at truthandliberty.net. You'll get updates and you'll be eligible for the drawing. And last week's winner was Amy Crabtree. Amy, we want to congratulate you. You received God and Country, the CD by Andrew Wommack. And this week we've got a product called In God We Trust by Andrew Wommack. And we are visiting about that too. And this is actually about finances, kind of that time when you think you're trusting in God, but are we really trusting in the Lord? And so if you are hitting a rough patch with your finances or have some questions, this is a great teaching. Also, one of the things that's special about the Truth and Liberty livecast is you ask us questions and we answer as many of those as possible. So if you're watching on social media, simply put your question in the comments. We've got a team that's sending those right here to this iPad. And if you're on truthandliberty.net or awmi.net, you can answer or ask your question in the chat section, and we will answer as many as possible. And the ones we don't get to, Richard follows up the following Tuesday afternoon, and he answers even more of them. Also, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to support Truth and Liberty. If you've been watching the programs, you know that we have recently become a 501c4, so that, as Andrew says, we can say whatever we want.
Yes, he does.
Right?
Say that. Yes.
And so we really would appreciate your support to help fund these live casts and some of the initiatives that we've got going in Truth and Liberty. And to do that, you can go to truthandliberty.net/donate or call our phone center at 719-635-1111.
Wow, thank you, Karen.
I'm
really looking forward to that Queen of Esther production. It's the first time ever. I just know Elizabeth Murin is going to do a fantastic job, like always.
It's just amazing, the programs. And this is the premiere, never seen before, right here at Charis Bible College.
Well, I'm also excited about our guest tonight. Jeremy Dys is with us from First Liberty. Jeremy, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, I think that your title is Special Counsel for Litigation and Communications at First Liberty, and you're also an attorney, been practicing for, I think, 14 years. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, the title kind of says a lot about what it is and what I do. Of course, it means that I'm special and that I sue people and I tell everybody about it. And so I get the privilege of working for First Liberty Institute to make sure that we defend religious liberty for all Americans. That's my job at First Liberty. And I'm glad that First Liberty Institute is here at firstliberty.org, making sure that all Americans have the right to be able to live their lives according to their faith, whether that's in the schoolhouse, in the houses of worship, in our military, or within our public square. We want to make sure that everyone has the freedom to freely exercise their religious beliefs.
Well, that's awesome, Jeremy. I tell you, I don't know where we'd be today if it weren't for organizations like First Liberty and what you guys are doing to stand up for the original intent of the Constitution and our freedom of speech and our freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and so forth. So if people would like to learn more about your organization, can they check you out on the web?
Yeah, of course. Go to firstliberty.org. That's FIRST liberty.org. And of course, we have places reserved at Facebook and Twitter and anywhere else that you're supposed to put your handle these days. We're certainly telling the story of religious liberty as far and wide as we possibly can.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I want to just get right into some of the news that's going on right now and get your input on it, Jeremy. As you know, there is impeachment is all over the place in the headlines right now, and I think a lot of people are a little bit confused about what's going on and maybe not clear on what is this impeachment thing. We've been hearing about it ever since Donald Trump was elected, it seems like, but just so our viewers understand, impeachment is talked about in the United States Constitution, and what exactly is that procedure?
Well, broadly speaking, impeachment is the way in which the Congress expresses its disapproval of activities and actions by the President of the United States, and if they have amounted to something so severe that merits removal from office and overturning the vote of the people, that's the job of the Congress to do. Now, again, in broad terms, the Congress has the right to initiate those articles of impeachment. And it begins with literally written articles of impeachment, why they are accusing of the president of violating what are called high crimes and misdemeanors. And I think the answer to what are high crimes and misdemeanors is basically to look at the words again. They're high. There's something important. There's something that has been done that is very, very bad. It's not quite treasonous, but it's getting pretty high up there in terms of the president doing things that his office ought not to be doing. And so if you remember back to different impeachment proceedings in our country, you have a couple years ago, or back when I was in high school or college, I guess, President Clinton being impeached in the House of Representatives for perjury, for lying under oath. And you had President Nixon facing the possibility of impeachment for his role in Watergate, and going way back to the 1800s with, I just blanked on the other president here. It was Cleveland, I guess. It was not Cleveland. It was Johnson, Andrew Johnson. Yeah. So Andrew Johnson faced that impeachment as well for a certain scandal that he had to go through. But the point again is that you're supposed to, or that the president has done something that is against the role of the president to do, and it's of such significance that it merits attention by the United States House of Representatives. And so the House of Representatives brings it. They bring that through usually the Judiciary Committee, where there is literally a judge and jury of congressmen that are put together there to hear testimony about that, to bring in as much information as possible, to weigh that information, and then vote up or down as the House of Congress as to whether or not the president ought to be impeached by a significant vote of the House of Representatives. And if that is successful, then it transfers the matter over to the United States Senate, who is tasked constitutionally with the responsibility of weighing the conviction of that impeachment, which would then result in the ouster of the president from office. In this situation, that looks to be rather unlikely that the GOP-led Senate would actually vote to remove the president or vote to convict the articles of impeachment. But that certainly is a possibility and within the right of the Senate to do. And that proceeding, of course, is presided over not by the vice president, who usually presides over the Senate, especially in matters of a tie, but by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And so those, again, of my age will remember Chief Justice Rehnquist wearing his striped robe that he used to wear on the bench over in the United States Senate. And recent reports have come out about how difficult of a job he found that to be, and how significantly different that would be from the building across the street of North Capitol there. So it's interesting for time for us to be paying attention to these things. We should also remind ourselves that this is all taking place within a political context, and so it is also very much subject to the political processes that are at play.
That's good. One of the terms we hear a lot is quid pro quo. And so we've got an attorney here and an attorney here. So between the two of you, can you help us understand exactly what that means? And when you're looking at the Ukraine situation, in your opinion, from what you know, have we hit that point?
Well, literally from my memory of Latin, the quid pro quo means this for that. And so it is an exchange of something. I promised you this, and you're going to give me that. I truthfully wouldn't express an opinion on it, even if I had a formed one in my own brain. I've read, like many people, the president's conversations over the phone, and I've listened to every single talking head that I think is out there to be listened to, probably. And frankly, I'm still not sure what's going on and whether or not there was an actual quid pro quo. And actually then, if there was, who was it that did that? Was it President Trump that engaged in that quid pro quo, or was it Vice President Biden when he was in office? There are a lot of questions that have to be answered. And those that are in Congress that are now tasked with this process of impeachment are the ones that have to not only gather that information, but assemble it to make some sort of sense, and then have the wherewithal to muster enough votes to, in fact, impeach.
Well, so as Karen mentioned in the intro to the show, we've put the transcript of President Trump's call with the president of the Ukraine on our resources on our website, so everybody can read that there. But Jeremy, I've read that transcript. Sounds like you've read it. Just within the, as we lawyers like to say, within the four corners of that transcript, I don't see any quid pro quo. So what are they saying was the this for that? What's your understanding?
My understanding of it is that the accusation, anyway, is that President Trump wanted to do something to go against his potential rival, Joe Biden. And so he asked the president of the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden's son and his involvement with the Ukrainian oil business out there, gas business, I guess. And if there was, in fact, something that had gone wrong, to impose the penalties that needed to be imposed, or at least to be a pest of the legal process, using the legal process to be a pest towards his potential political rival. Again, I don't know whether or not any of that is factual or true, but that's the allegations that are swirling around, and it's up to the Congress right now to weigh those factors and gather as much information as possible, and to consider those, and then, if necessary, muster enough votes to impeach the president, if in fact they can do that.
How does that work with Biden when he was vice president? I mean, he has quotes that clearly say that you will not get aid if you don't remove this leader that was leading the investigation. So I think a lot of us just are asking the question, how can that be so obvious? Yet with Trump right now, it is just all about what he has done. And one is actually he's stating it, where we all read the quote. So how does that work? Do you go backwards? How does that play into this situation legally?
Well, legally, it's one thing to just take the information and then weigh it, of course. But then I think we also have to go back to the context itself, and that is the issue of politics. I mean, we have a government, sure, that has been elected by the people and are supposed to be for the people, but certainly those elected officials have an understanding that the next election is only a few months away for the presidency, and also their own election is coming up rather quickly as well, either in the House of Representatives or the Senate, depending upon their terms. And so clearly there is a divide within our government. That divide is largely separated by the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's very little overlap. And as we've seen even in the last year with Justice Kavanaugh, and as he went through his confirmation process, that process, our political process itself, is extremely lacking in civility. And so I don't see it as beneath, anyway, the process of politics to re-engage that issue and to use what is otherwise a very rare process to inflict some political damage. And perhaps that's what's at play. I don't really know. But it is the process, it is the responsibility of the Congress to wield that tool of impeachment very carefully, but also necessarily when they need to do it. But it certainly would not be above the political process in our modern context to wield the process of impeachment for political purposes of their own.
Mm-hmm. Do you know one other item that has come up, and you guys are so smart with legal things. I'm just more like your regular audience that's reading all the news articles. But this issue with the whistleblower. So I've heard that you really can't have a whistleblower with the president. It would be considered a leak. Yet this is all about a whistleblower. So how is someone able to go at the president through this process and then have some communication the way it looks like with Schiff and that team prior? And I also heard, whether this is true or not, we can cut through some of these facts, that the document itself was adjusted. The template that was used to actually submit the complaint was changed right before submission. So can you explain the difference between a whistleblower and a leak?
I hope I can give a little bit of clarity to that anyway. A whistleblower would be someone who says something is going on that is requiring a lot of attention. And if I speak out about it publicly with my name in my face in public about it, I stand to lose something, usually my job, if I do that. And so I could be terminated by someone above me in power because I chose to speak up on this issue. And so we provide them some form of protection so that they will come forward with information that will lead to further information, and in this case, potentially impeachable information that is necessary to rectify what this person considers a severe wrong. Whistleblowers are not omniscient, and they are not omnipresent either. So they may not have been in the room for the right hearings of things. They may not know all the information that they think they actually know. And that is, again, why I think it's important for the Congress to grab all the information they possibly can, to review all the transcripts they possibly can, and then arrive at a determination as to whether or not this president has, in fact, engaged in activity that warrants the description of high crime or misdemeanor. And if it does, in fact, to rise to that occasion, then it's right and proper for the Congress to so act and hold him in impeachment, and the Senate to do their thing as well. But whistleblowers are then distinct, I guess, from people who are termed as leaks. Leaks are sometimes accidental. They say something to somebody that they should not have said, and they did anyway. Leaks are sometimes nefarious. They want to undermine a certain political activity of whoever they're working for. And leaks are sometimes purposeful, that the White House will actually put information out there through a back channel so that they can have a chance to react to it all. So a whistleblower is someone, though, who is distinct from a leak in that they don't want to have legal or other repercussions come against them for the activities that they take. And so we provide that protection under the Whistleblowers Act in Congress.
That's a great answer, Jeremy. Thank you for that. The one thing I'd point out on this particular whistleblower is the unusual fact that he or she chose to blow the whistle with Congress. In fact, a specific committee of Congress where Adam Schiff happens to be the chairman, who is one of Trump's obvious political enemies. Instead of just reporting it through normal circles in the administration, wherever there are procedures for that, you file your complaint at the Department of Justice or something like that, and instead of that, this whistleblower goes to Congress. Obviously, I think it's obvious that they probably had a political agenda in line. So that's a very interesting fact there. But I'd like, we probably need to get to the Supreme Court here. The time is ticking away. Not that we're not interested in impeachment. It's fantastic. But Jeremy, you're at First Liberty, and you guys do Supreme Court work and lower court work all the time. And this last year or two has seen some really important developments at the United States Supreme Court, some important cases with NIFLA and Masterpiece Bakery, which is right out of our backyard here in Colorado, and then the Bladensburg War Memorial case. So I'd just be curious on kind of your observations of, is the case law at the Supreme Court swinging back towards more protection, traditional protection for freedom of speech and freedom of conscience?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I think there's reason for us to be optimistic that that's the direction it's going. Or maybe the better way to say it is that we should be optimistic that we have a Supreme Court that is beginning to be filled out by those who believe in the idea of originalism and textualism, that believe that words actually have meaning and that we ought to understand what those words mean and then act by them. And furthermore, that we have justices that are understanding that they have a limited role within our tripartite government, that theirs is not a role to engage in some sort of legislation from that bench, but is in fact to interpret what the Constitution says and then apply it to the law that is in front of them, and leave the executing of those laws to the presidency, and leave the legislating of laws in their own form to the Congress and the Senate. And so I'm optimistic that that's actually happening here. And I think one good example of that is in this case you saw and you cited here, the Bladensburg Memorial case, or the case name itself is the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. We represented the American Legion in that case before the Supreme Court of the United States, and it involved a nearly 100-year-old veterans memorial that Gold Star mothers decided to put up in honor of their sons who died in World War I. And they chose the image that they would use for this memorial to be a cross, in fact, a Celtic cross, to evoke the crosses that were over their sons' graves in Europe where they fell. Many of whom were buried right where they fell in Flanders Fields and the fields surrounding it. And so it stood there now for almost 100 years without any kind of problem until a couple of years ago, someone decided that the presence of that cross in honor of these 49 men for Prince George's County, Maryland, that had been there for all these decades was suddenly in violation of the Constitution, and that it had to be removed. In fact, during our oral argument at the Fourth Circuit, so the court right below the Supreme Court of the United States, the justices there suggested, or the judges suggested and said that perhaps they could solve the whole problem by simply removing the horizontal arms of that cross. And of course, we weren't going to stand up for the defacing of a veterans memorial like that. We wanted to make sure that that stayed put right where it should be and preserved for the next 100 years, because we knew that if that decision was allowed to stand right there in Maryland and that area, then that bulldozer would not stop at the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial, but would roll across the Potomac right into Arlington National Cemetery, knocking down memorials very much similar to it, and then across the countryside, saying all this religious imagery and religious symbolism has to be removed from public sight. And that is something that the court simply would not stomach, and that's the point I wanted to make. We're now back to some common sense in this decision, where the court said, look, if we have this memorial torn down, it's sending a distinct message across the country that the government ought to roam around the country, it says, and knock things down. And they said that level of religious hostility we will not put up with, and we should not put up with that kind of thing. Instead, the holding of the court is this, that these longstanding monuments, memorials, and activities that are religiously expressive in nature, the court says, they're now presumed to be constitutional. Well, that is a major sea change in the law that we know, as we know it in the world of the Establishment Clause, because before it used to be that we would have to prove that these monuments are in fact constitutional. Now the other side has to demonstrate that they're unconstitutional to begin with. So they bear a presumption now, not just religious monument or religiously expressive monuments, but also symbols and activities. And And I don't think this is limited by time. I think this is going to be an issue of whether or not we've done something like this or had it as a part of our country and a tradition of our country for a long time. And we can get into a little bit more about what that means. But the bottom line is now the change that has occurred is that these religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and activities are now, in the words of the court, presumptively constitutional. And that is a very important holding.
Yeah, that sure is. Well, well done, First Liberty.
Yeah, congratulations.
Are you already seeing the Bladensburg case cited by lower courts?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we are. In fact, not just a couple weeks after that decision came down and right after the mandate was issued by the Supreme Court, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals was holding a case out of Lehigh, Pennsylvania, the county of Lehigh, Pennsylvania, that had a seal or has a seal that maybe you know what your county seal looks like. I have no clue what mine looks like. But Lehigh County loves their seal, apparently. And one of the images in the seal, in addition to some factories and some farming implements and a very prominent cow listed within that, or I guess it's a bison actually listed in that seal, is a very prominently featured cross right in the middle of that seal. And so the court was holding that and waiting for the Supreme Court to make its mind up in the American Legion case. And after it did, the court came out and said, yeah, this seal is perfectly constitutional. The court said that these kinds of things are presumptively constitutional. Religious symbols, religiously expressive symbols like this are presumptively constitutional. We're going to allow that to stand as well. And so the county of Lehigh retains its seal. And it's just a matter of time before we see that being followed in more and more federal courts, and well, we should.
That's great. Do you think this will reduce the number of cases that we're seeing come to the forefront? Like, for example, with the Masterpiece Bakery, you would hope it would stop some of these lawsuits from just really financially harming people, is what it's doing. Do you think we'll see less of this being brought forth?
Well, on that particular issue, when it comes to expression like Jack Phillips or Aaron and Melissa Klein, our clients, and the Cake Bake Shop, those are remaining to be seen, and we can talk a little bit about those too. But within the context of religious symbols or monuments and that sort of thing being in the public square, or even things like our national motto being displayed on buildings, prayers before legislative meetings, those types of activities that are religiously expressive in nature, that's where I think you're going to see a big sea change of what's going on. Anywhere what is called the Establishment Clause is touching upon, I think there's been a massive change now in the law about that. And so we're going to have to go to the Free Exercise Clause now with these other cake baker and these other expressive activities that are taking place over there. But very importantly, that area of the law that involves the Establishment Clause, that is now much more fully protected than it was even a couple months ago. In fact, I would say, and we were talking a little bit about this off air, that it's going to be very difficult for the other side to actually bring a lawsuit on that, because one of the tests that they used to rely on is called the Lemon test, named after another Supreme Court case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, which has been very unworkable over the decades that it's been in existence. Well, that test is all but done away with at this point with the American Legion case. And so lawsuits against symbols and memorials and monuments and even nativity scenes are going to be very difficult to bring, because the courts now hold in very low regard that Lemon test.
Wow, I'm an attorney, Karen, and I just think the court didn't expressly overrule the Lemon test. And folks, what that is from a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. I think it was in 1971. It's been on the books for, 50 years now almost. And for the Supreme Court they didn't expressly reject that test in the Bladensburg case, but they pretty well set it aside and said this isn't really going to work anymore. And for them to do that is just revolutionary, because there were some key pieces in that Lemon test, like requiring a strict neutrality between religion and non-religion, prohibiting government entanglement with religion, prohibiting government endorsement of religion, and all those things were the hooks on which the ACLU and the other anti-God crowd would come and hang their coats and hang their hats, and that's where we've been having so much trouble over the years. And so I'm really excited about that personally.
Are you seeing that the justices are still voting with their political lines, or are you starting to see that maybe some of them are maybe moving over from that hard liberal line to be in favor of some of these cases?
Well, I think the justices themselves have a certain judicial philosophy and certainly a legal philosophy that they bring to all of their cases. And I think you right now have with the addition of Justice Kavanaugh to the bench, a court that leans to the conservative side of things, or perhaps better said, swings to the conservative side of things. But, I should point out that American Legion case was a 7-2 decision. Now, the case was rather significant in terms of its plurality of decisions that were within it. You kind of got to connect the dots all the way through the whole thing. But the core holding of it, this idea that these religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and activities are presumed to be constitutional, that was within the majority opinion, and 7 of the 9 justices agreed. In fact, the 2 justices that disagreed with that, which were Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ginsburg, they even had to admit that there's a certain amount of our history that does involve religious expression on things, but they have a different way of viewing what that looks like, and would have left the Lemon Test and would have struck down the memorial itself. So we're only a few votes away, really 1 or 2 votes away from having some very significant problems when it came to Establishment Clause cases. And so I'm very grateful that this court put the brakes on that and said, no, we're gonna relook at what these things mean. And instead of just doing away with them or having some sort of balancing test or trying to determine whether something is too coercive or too much entanglement here or there, instead we're going to say, look, if it falls along the lines of the things that we've always done as a country, we're going to hold them to be presumptively constitutional. And I think every American ought to rest well knowing that the traditions that have made us a great nation are going to continue because of this decision.
Wow, fantastic.
That's great.
Well, Jeremy, I'd like to get into a little bit here about what we're going to see in this term of the United States Supreme Court that's coming up. I think that from what I've seen, there are several potentially important cases, and so it'd be great if you could share with our viewers a little bit about that. I can see that there's a couple of Title VII cases where the court is being asked to answer the question of what does sex discrimination mean? Does that include sexual orientation, gender identity discrimination, and so forth? But what are we looking at in this term that's coming up?
Well, of course, there's going to be a lot of cases that nobody even knows about that are going to take place, and those are going to involve private businesses and contracts and things like that you and I might kind of nod off during contracts law way back in law school. But those are going to be vitally important, of course, of settling our free market system and all those kinds of things. But the ones you're after are the ones that are going to be culturally shifting on things. And these are going to be very important decisions to watch as they come out. In fact, tomorrow, many of those hearings are going to be made at the court. In fact, I think there are 3 separate cases on Title VII, that some of which have been consolidated, of course, on the question of whether or not the term in Title VII, that area of the law that governs discrimination in employment, or rather, I should say, non-discrimination employment, that makes it illegal to fire someone according to their race or their gender or their religion and age and that sort of thing. Whether Title VII's language about sex in there, does that include the modern ideas of the sexual revolution? Does sex, when it was passed back in 1967, Title VII was, did that contemplate at that time the inclusion of however many genders or sexual orientations or pronouns that are out there right now that we're talking about in the daily conversation, it seems like these days? Did the Congress foresee that to be the case or not? And I think the court is really presented with the test of originalism and textualism again.
Yes.
Do words actually have meaning? And also, is there a separation of powers question here? In other words, is it up to the Congress to make that determination or update the statutes, or can they rely upon the judges to do that? I would personally fall in my own ideas of judicial philosophy and legal philosophy that it is the role of the legislature to legislate. And if laws need to be updated, then it is something that needs to be done at the lowest level possible. And in this situation, that would be within the Congress. And so we're going to find out one way or another whether or not our justices believe that words have meaning and understand that it is not their responsibility to legislate. And if there is a need for updating of the statute, that is done within the definition section of a statute, and that is left to the legislature to do, and not the judiciary itself. But that's what's up for debate right now before the Supreme Court of the United States, whether or not judges are going to be allowed to define the word that is a word that is in a statute, and whether that word is something that was not even contemplated back in 1967 when the initial statute was put into place.
Well, the 2 cases that I'm thinking of now, 2 of them are consolidated. I think it's Bostock, and I don't recall the other one, but it has to do with sexual orientation. a gay man claims that he was fired by the county government wherever he lives or something like that because of his sexual orientation. So he's saying, well, when Title VII in the federal law says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, that includes my personal sexual orientation, not just biological male-female. And then the other case has to do with a funeral home where I think a man claimed or he believes himself to be female or wants to be female or whatever, and he began dressing like a woman. And this is a guy who's interacting with grieving families and loved ones who are coming in, for the services of the funeral home. And eventually the funeral home, I understand it, had to say, wait a second, this is a little bit distracting for our customers, and we can't allow this to go on. And so he's also suing under Title VII. So, Jeremy, if they open this door, boy, what a mess we're going to have, huh?
Oh, it certainly is. And again, it comes down to the definition of a word. And does that word mean what it meant back in 1967, or does it mean something that, as we understand it today, or think we understand it anyway, today in 2019? There are a number, depending on what resource you're looking at, there are all kinds of sexual orientations that are out there, 2, 3, 5, 10, 100, depending upon who you're reading and who you're following. I saw a report out of the BBC not too long ago saying that there were 100 different sexual orientations and gender's identity. So it's going to be a decision for the court to determine, is this the right thing for this court as an initial matter for us to be deciding, or is that something that the Congress is better suited to do with its role so closely to the people of the United States in itself? But then, that's in one context in terms of the sexual orientation side of that with Bostock and the Zarda case that is out there. But then the GRRG funeral homes, Harris Funeral Homes case, that also is dealing with transgenderism. And is there, so all those things combined, whether it's sexual orientation or transgenderism, it all is concerning whether or not the term gender or the term sex within the statute itself means what it meant then or means what some people think it means today. That's the question before the court. And the implications for that, especially in the Harris case, being a religious owner there, for people's religious liberty is going to be up in question as well.
Well, we're getting down to the point in the broadcast where we're going to take some questions, but I did want to ask you, there's an important, potentially important abortion case also on the horizon, I think. The court voted to hear a case coming out of Louisiana, where Louisiana had passed a statute requiring that doctors who perform abortions have to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals, a statute that was rather similar to laws passed in other states, including in Texas. And the Texas statute had been ruled unconstitutional by the court in 2016. So it's really interesting to me that the court is granting cert on this case. Do you have any insights that you could share with us on that matter?
Well, this is going to come down again to sort of this battle between the legislature and longstanding precedent of the Supreme Court of the United States. The question of when does life begin and what restrictions one is able to put upon the process of abortion, that's all within the context of this discussion right now. There have been several cases where we have had to deal with the legalization of abortion, and if we're going to have it legal, then what level of regulation is permissible to be placed upon this practice? And over the years, that has gone at various weeks and various practices, whether or not you can have contraceptives that are added to that or not, or if you have to have those required or not. So there's a lot of things that kind of swirl in this mix of this area of the law in life, human life. But the question here is going to be whether or not precise legislation is going to be permissible to allow the doctor, or to require the doctor, I should say, to have admitting privileges to the hospital nearby where he's performing the procedure. Well, why is that important? Well, if you go into your physician for a procedure of some sort, an outpatient procedure, an outpatient surgery, and something goes desperately wrong, it's very important for a doctor to be able to continue with his patient at the hospital that is equipped to handle things that that clinic may not be able to handle. And so I think it's very reasonable, at least it appears very reasonable to me to think about, at least it appeared very reasonable to the legislature, to require a doctor to be able to see and visit his patient post-op, during op, and if something were to go wrong in the hospital later on. I would think, and I think the legislature thought, that it would be common sense for a doctor to have to be able to walk through the doors and administer medicine to the patient that he or she had seen not too long before all that. That's the question that's going to be coming up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and one of the very first tests, I guess, of just how conservative this quote unquote conservative majority of the Supreme Court actually is.
Well, I could ask you questions all night long, Jeremy, but we want to get to some viewer questions. Karen, I bet we've got some good ones coming in.
We really do. This has been just a great broadcast, and I can tell by all the questions that we have. The first one is coming in from a guest, and the question is this: what is your process, and this is to you, Jeremy, of receiving new cases and qualifying them, and how might one go about having your organization support and defend them in court?
Well, you go to firstliberty.org, which is the best place to start. And there's a tab at the top of that website at firstliberty.org that says Get Legal Help Now. And if you fill out that form and give us a little bit of information, our staff reviews that information and evaluates whether or not that's something that we should engage on or not. Now, the good news is, and I didn't explain this at the top of the broadcast, but I should have, is that if we're able to take your case, we do all of our work pro bono. We don't charge our clients for the work that we do. Now, we only handle issues of religious liberty, and whether that's within the schools, our houses of worship, within the public square, or within the military. We want to make sure that all Americans have the right to be able to exercise their faith. However, we partner with major international law firms who also work pro bono on our cases to make sure that they have the very best representation. Look, we don't think that you should have to pay an attorney if you've had your First Amendment rights questioned, and that's why we are able to provide that legal service, because that's what we're dedicated to, for one thing, but because good Americans like you and others across this country have decided to donate to First Liberty to make sure that no one has to pay an attorney if their civil rights have been violated.
Very good. The next question is, what is the First Liberty briefing, and where can I go to watch?
Well, the First Liberty Briefing is a 90-second podcast, so it's an audio thing for now anyway. Maybe that'll turn into something more video-like later on, but it's just our way of telling the story of religious liberty in this country. It comes out once a week, and it's found wherever you can find podcasts, whether that's on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. You can download that to your device, and it'll be delivered there every Monday morning for you to hear in about 90 seconds, which coincidentally is about the amount of time that your dentist tells you to brush your teeth. So if you want to press play when you start brushing, you can stop. You can stop the podcast and stop brushing your teeth when the podcast is over. Now, I will have to say that you're going to have to like this voice, because I happen to be the host of the podcast, and I get to tell the stories of religious liberty that are affecting millions of Americans every day.
Oh, that's great, Jeremy. Okay, this is coming in from Reepacheep on chat, and he or she says, can you explain what the dual justice system is and how we can prevent it?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the brave little mouse has in mind with dual justice system, but perhaps he means our federalist system of our federal judges and our state court systems as well, and that sometimes is competing. That a federal matter will be in conflict with a federal matter that's decided by a state court judge, and so ultimately, all the state matters, if they touch upon a federal right or a right guaranteed within our federal Constitution, they will eventually have to be settled by the Supreme Court of the United States and bow to the Constitution of these United States. But that's our system of government. Whether or not we have a federal system or an anti-federal system, that was decided much long ago, and we were able to have these parallel systems in place that thankfully don't conflict that very often.
Great. Okay, this is from Shar on chat, and Shar says, if Congress brings an impeachment case to the Senate and they find President Trump not guilty, can they attempt to prosecute him for the same crime once he is out of office?
That's a great question. I don't truthfully know the answer to that question. He would still have been impeached. That's the technical term for the action that the House of Representatives has taken. But whether or not they can vote to convict him on that in the Senate, and if they choose not to, of course, those articles are now done and over with. But whether or not he's engaged in a crime during his time in office, I suppose if the statute of limitations has not run, perhaps he would be actually liable for those things. But again, I think what we're talking about right now are not so much crimes as in, the traditional ideas of crime of theft and burglary and things like that, but are much more political in nature. And the question before the Congress is whether or not those political crimes, if they are crimes indeed, rise to the level of a high crime and a high misdemeanor sufficient to merit the attention of an articles of impeachment.
I think a lot of people are asking this question about the Biden situation,
Right.
the withholding. And so as this uncovers and goes down the road, is that something that Congress would then feel that they need to take up and address from when President Obama was in office?
Yeah, well, they couldn't bring any kind of articles of impeachment at that time. Obviously, he's not in office any longer. However, usually when people are doing wrong things, more wrong things arise, and those trails usually become rather evident. And I mean, my dad I remember him telling me that don't trust anything that's been done in secret because it will one day have its light shown upon it. And so whether or not that is the light of the justice system or the ultimate judge of the universe, those deeds done in darkness will be made into light, and we will witness whether or not they're true or false at some point in our universe's history. So whether or not that is human justice that is meted out for something that someone may have done wrong, or whether or not that is judged in eternity, at one point, those deeds done in darkness will come out.
Well, I'll jump in here on this one and say that, if Biden did use his office for illegal purposes in terms of the Ukraine or whatever, I think that's actually being investigated right now by the Justice Department, and I'm sure that they're looking at what laws might have been violated at that time, and I think that Biden might be susceptible to criminal prosecution, at least in theory. It's a little bit hard to imagine that actually happening, but the Justice Department is looking into that question, and some people are arguing that that's the very reason why this impeachment situation has arisen, is it's a politically motivated effort to derail that. As you might hear the Democrats talking about, they want to go after Barr, Attorney General Barr, and the gentleman that he's appointed to lead that investigation as well.
Great, thank you, Richard. This is from guest 4262 on chat. And the question is, since President Trump's transcript is now public, what is the purpose of the media continuing to talk about the whistleblower? And shouldn't the evidence be about the transcript and not someone who heard or supposedly heard something?
Well, I suppose the reason the media keeps on talking about it is that other people want to talk about it as well and want to hear about it all. And this is all very central to the whistleblower's complaint. So there are never-ending a line of people that have an opinion on what's actually going on, and they all seem to have the number of the local news station on this as well. So, and apparently, according to every major news network that's out there, evidently those do good with ratings. And so they continue to bring people on the shows to talk about this and examine it from new and improved angles that were neither new nor improved. So we will continue to face this until this whole thing's put to bed, with an actual vote on the articles of impeachment and later on in the trial in the Senate.
There's some talk about whether President Trump will be able to face the whistleblower. How does that work as far as a whistleblower causing all this happening? Is there a point at which they're going to be required to face the president and to face the public with these allegations?
I truthfully don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so. I think the idea behind a whistleblower is that person may remain anonymous as much as possible. And so they would likely be represented or making representations through their attorney before the committee, perhaps in written testimony, perhaps not. But again, that's a decision that is going to be left to the Congress. If they're going to allow testimony to come forward from an anonymous person without the opportunity to cross-examine that person, whether or not that's going to be permitted to then lend evidence to the ideas of high crime and misdemeanor, and then the very important vote. And let's not forget that it is a very serious thing that they're undertaking here, these impeachment proceedings. Whether that's going to be permitted or not, that's up to the House of Representatives. And then behind all that, of course, whether you and I ought to support their decision in the way that they've handled these proceedings when it comes time for us to vote on them again at the next election cycle.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so this is from Just a Guest on chat. We're getting some really unique names, aren't we? This is really fun. The question is, what parts of the Constitution of the United States do you think are under the most attack right now?
Oh, wow. Good question.
Well, I usually tell my Second Amendment friends that the amendments go in order. So it's, the First Amendment is heavily under attack, and those protections of religious liberty in particular, our very first liberty, and also of speech and the things that are contained within that First Amendment. But then it goes on down the line into the Second Amendment, where we're going to be having some gun rights cases at the Supreme Court of the United States this year. And of course, we'll keep on going to the other amendments as well. But in general, I would say this, that within the political system, taking it outside of the legal system for a moment, the way that our Constitution governs is legitimately under attack day by day, whether government officials understand their limitations with our Constitution, meaning we have a document that has acknowledged at the beginning that it is the people by whom this government is constituted and for the people that it is constituted, that they did so by being possessed of certain inalienable rights that we can identify within our Declaration of Independence, but that they needed to form, it was necessary to form a more perfect union, it says in the preamble. And in order to do that, they had to form a government with this Constitution. So what is the structure of that Constitution? Well, you have various articles that articulate the actual powers of the government. And it's as if the American people are saying, these are my rights to live in a self-determined manner, but I'm going to give over some of those rights, not all, but some of those rights to you as the government in order to lay this government into place. And so we're going to let the president be the president. We're going to have the laws developed by the legislature, and they're going to be interpreted as to constitutional or not by our judiciary. And with all those three working together, that will be our government. And then there are other limitations of powers about our armies and the ability to tax and all these things. And then it gets to the end of our Constitution proper, and there's this big bright line there that ends it right before we get to our amendments. And our amendments are put in place to say, we did not give you these rights. And so it begins in the First Amendment with the words, Congress shall make no law, saying we didn't give you the freedom to abridge our speech or to limit our religious liberty or to establish an official religion in our country, and on down the line until you get to the 10th Amendment, which says, look, if we forgot anything within these amendments, those rights are reserved to the states, and then if not there, then to the people themselves. We didn't give up all of our rights. We gave you certain limitations. The problem that we run into, especially within the First Amendment, is when school officials or county officials or any other state official seeks to be a government unto themselves, to exceed the proper role of government itself, and go beyond the articulated rights and responsibilities that we've given to government, and then take upon them the freedoms that we still possess. That's when we get into some significant problems and when we have to apply the law to our government officials. When they stay within their proper role and authority of those first articles of the Constitution and act in a limited manner there, then we're all very, very happy to be able to have our own freedom. But when they exceed that, it is right and it is proper for us to apply the law to them. And that's thankfully what I get to do as the special counsel for litigation and communications. I then become very special because I get to sue them and tell everybody about them.
Wow, Jeremy, I want to get a transcript of that answer.
That's
That was
awesome.
phenomenal. You know, it seems like I saw that recently there was a survey done, and the majority of college students think that it's okay to limit freedom of speech when the speech is offensive and or hateful, as they say. Do you agree that today in America the public has really in large measure doesn't really understand our first freedoms? And in follow up to that, what can we do to rebuild that understanding and that knowledge?
Yeah, I would agree that there is certainly a lack of understanding that we have as a nation about what our freedoms actually are. And I do not agree with the idea that the best solution is to censor speech you don't agree with. The best solution for speech you find disagreeable is more speech, and not only more speech, but speech that's better than the speech you disagree with. That's what the Founding Fathers had in mind. They wanted us to understand that there was this capital T truth that was out there, and that we were to pursue that as human beings were to pursue that capital T truth and understand what truth that is transcendent means in our lives. And so they set us on a course to allow ourselves to have that dialogue, to have that vigorous dialogue, and if necessary, a very loud and disagreeable dialogue, and then walk away still to be neighbors and friends within all of that. That's why they put the First Amendment in place, so that they would guarantee the ability for us to have that disagreement, to have speech that we disagree with, but be able to meet the speech with better speech of our own in an effort to persuade you as to the rightness of our position and ultimately the pursuit of truth. But then you asked a very important question at the end of that I really I'm so glad you asked, because it's so very important. How do we get to that point? How do we help future generations understand what our freedoms actually are? If they're not going to teach it to us in schools, and if we're not going to undertake it on our own to read the Constitution ourselves and to familiarize ourselves with the Federalist Papers, for instance, or the Declaration of Independence even, then it's incumbent upon you and me. And I like to talk to moms and dads directly on this. I have 4 sons myself, and aside from tonight, I love to sit down at dinner time with them and have these conversations. Or perhaps it's with my oldest son and he and I training for the next 5K together, have this conversation. The way that we transmit freedom is not that difficult. The way that we transmit freedom, President Reagan said it this way. He said that freedom is not something that we pass down through the bloodstream. It's the responsibility of every generation to recommit themselves to freedom itself. And so, Mom and Dad, you want to know how to transmit that freedom? Have dinner together with your kids and tell them what freedom actually means. Read to them the First Amendment and tell them what it means to be a country that values the freedom to be able to express your religious beliefs, not within the 4 corners of your home, but throughout the public square and wherever you might be. And then compare that to other countries where that has historically not been the case. We are the exception right now in the world, and in our human history for that matter, of a country that values the freedom to be able to express your religious beliefs, even if that means disagreeing with the king himself. That's good for us. And so it requires you and me, Mom and Dad, sitting down with our kids and transmitting that idea of freedom to that next generation. Because if you and I don't do that, it will not follow through the bloodstream. It's up to you and me to do it.
Wow, fantastic.
That's excellent.
Yeah. Well, we've got 2 minutes and 20 seconds left here. Can we squeeze in one more question? Can you be really brief?
Yes. Okay.
I usually get paid by the word, so good luck.
This is from Cowboy Tom on chat. And he says, could Jeremy please speak to the issue of perversion of justice by case law? Could you please explain the original intent of the founders, law based on God, Blackstone's commentary on the law, etc.?
Wow, in 1 minute.
I get 1 minute to explain all that. Look, I think we can summarize it this way, that we are a nation of limited government and limited articulated rights, as I just explained a few minutes ago. And when our leaders, and especially our judges, accord to themselves power that is not within our Constitution, then we have a problem. And that's where we've gone for too long here. For many decades now, we've been allowing judges and justices to aggrandize more and more authority in our nation that we never delegated to them. I think we're beginning to see a bit of a transition back to the understanding that Justices Scalia and Thomas and others have been saying for a long time, that even our justices have a limited role. As we've heard them say many times now, that they're not omniscient, they're not omnipotent, that they are just human beings like me and you that happen to wear a black robe. We owe it to them to hold them accountable to the principles of our government wherever we might be able to do that. And usually that's through our elected officials. That's why these elections have such great consequences, as we've seen even recently. President Trump and now has now nominated and confirmed, I think, 152 different judges or justices in the courts.
That's
they
awesome.
have consequences.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We've got about 40 seconds left here, so I'm going to just jump in here and wrap this up. Folks, I encourage you to go to the website, firstliberty.org, and check out this amazing organization. Support them financially and get behind the good work that they're doing. And it's been such an honor to have you with us tonight, Jeremy, and I hope everybody's learned something, and just excited that we have amazing warriors like you and everybody there at your organization out there fighting for all of us. So, folks, thanks for tuning in tonight. Next week, I hope you'll join us again Monday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I think our special guest is going to be Pastor Chris Volaton, so it's going to be awesome, and Karen's going to be back here helping host, so it's going to be a great night. So good night, everybody.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net or by calling our phone center at 719-635-1111. Our prayer ministers are there to help you with your donations and to pray with you.